and now you're aware. Let's talk about the appraisal addendums today to make sure that everybody feels really comfortable about using them. They've changed some since we really first started using them. And I want to make sure that we all understand exactly how they work and feel good about them. So before we really get started and look at them specifically, does anyone have any questions about them? No? Okay. Let's see. Then let's start with the gap addendum. And I'm going to share it really quickly. So give me a second. Can you guys see the gap addendum from Jackson? Yep. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So this is the one where you actually put an amount in. Now, the issue we had before was very simply, this wasn't included in the language. Seller shall lower the contract sales price. So the issue that we came across, and Meredith ended up being the guinea pig. Sorry for Meredith and her clients, but it doesn't specifically state that the seller has to lower the price. It was, I thought it was pretty clear what, I don't see how a buyer can only pay X amount above a certain price without the seller reducing the price. But nevertheless, now the new document says you put in the amount that they're willing to pay between this appraised value and the contract price and move to closing. And in that event, the new contract sales price, seller shall lower the contract sales price. So it's very plain and clear that the seller must reduce the sales price. Any questions about that?
So I have had zero luck with this. I'm just going to throw that out there. And honestly, as a listing agent, I don't think I would let my seller sign this.
And I'm not disagreeing with you. This isn't a document that's really pertinent when we're representing sellers. This is when we represent buyers.
But in Janine's case, they went back and forth because they didn't want to sign it, and then they got a better offer in that night, and she lost the deal.
Right. And that will happen too. I'm not saying you have to use this. I'm saying it's an option. So if a seller's not comfortable paying but a certain amount, this is how you state it. Nobody says they have to use it. It's just an option.
It just basically protects the buyer.
Correct.
Right.
Well, I've had people that, especially a first time, you write an offer with a client and you say, hey, listen, they've got 19 offers on this house. You're going to have to be prepared to make up the difference, right? And you say, and they say, I'm not comfortable doing that. I don't think I have to do that to win the house. Okay, I'm telling you, I don't think that that's going to work, but let's submit the offer and see what happens, right? Fill this thing out. We're willing to pay $5,000 over. And when they lose, you can come back and say, see, this just isn't going to work in this market. Now, obviously, it's different depending on a couple of different factors. If the home has been on the market for a while or they don't have a ton of offers or something like that, this may be more applicable, right? You may have more success with that. Same situation as Janine. I've lost one with this thing too. And, as much as it sucks, that is what it took for my buyer to realize that I'm not going to be able to say I'm only willing to go X over. I just got to commit to whatever number I put on the offer.
So that was the first time that I ever had pushback. I actually got this. I've had no trouble with this one, but this was in a different market in Southport. It was a pretty high price point. We were not in multiples when we submitted the offer. In fact, he called me back and said, I've never seen this document before. My sellers aren't comfortable signing this. I said, okay, well, I'm not going to let my buyer sign an open-ended appraisal addendum because I have to protect them. He's like, I completely understand that, but what if we get a bad appraisal? I said, I understand that as well. So we negotiated, and they he said, maybe there's got to be a way that we can come and meet in the middle and appease both parties and protect both parties. And so then the next morning, my people dropped the appraisal and gave them what they wanted, and then they still lost. So and they're VA too. So, I mean, there comes a point where your buyer can only do so much. And I would never sign an open-ended appraisal addendum because I got shot in the foot with that one time. So I am now telling my people, just pay the over ask. We didn't sign appraisal addendum, and we'll just cross the appraisal bridge when we get there.
And here in Jacksonville, every agent has a different way of doing it. And it's almost a way, just because we are in a seller's market, I think if your buyer's okay with it, doing it the way they want it. Like I have a conditions addendum that will say like buyer agrees to pay X amount over, not to exceed the purchase price. I submitted that on a conditions addendum the other day, and she came back and was like, can you put that on a blank addendum? Like there's really no difference. Just every agent has their own way of doing it.
Or I'll just write in the email, they can pay X over appraised value. But you can clearly see there's no appraisal value addendum.
There's nothing that's going to hold them to that, though.
And usually the listing agent will say, like, I want this in writing. Honestly, it comes down to, for me, like the way I personally do it is I run comps just like if it were a buyer's market, and I set the expectation. This house is priced really high, and I don't think it's going to appraise. Or I think it's fine, and then just set the expectation. What are you willing to pay over? And as long as they understand that and understand the risk.
Exactly. You're doing it the right way. And this is just putting it in writing, right? Here's the thing, to Brandon's point, this isn't a document you use for a home that's been on the market for one day and has 10 offers, right? Unless it's your first time offer writing person who doesn't believe what you're telling them about the market. All right. So you're either going to use it to lose and set expectations for the next time around, or you're probably using it for a house that's been on the market for 3 weeks that's ridiculously overpriced, and the market is telling them that. That's really what the gap addendum is about.
When y'all are losing with this, is it like in excess of like 20,000, or is it like 5 and 10?
My people signed 20,000 over list price, and we put that in there, the 20,000, and the sellers weren't comfortable signing. And I told the listing agent, I said, he's like, I'm 1,000% confident that this is not going to have an appraisal problem. I said, okay, well then why can't your seller sign it?
Right. So it didn't have anything to do with the document. It had something to do with the expectation that the listing agent set for the seller. It wasn't the document's fault.
That's my thing too, is if you as a listing agent is confident with what you listed your house for, then this should be no problem.
Absolutely. 100%. That's the heart of the issue.
And there's nothing wrong with saying that to the listing agent.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Right.
I believe it. Yeah. I mean, if you believe in your comps, why wouldn't you have your people sign this?
Yeah.
Oh, well, you never know. We might get a bad appraisal.
Yes, Brandon?
Fuck you.
Janine, I was curious.
Quit blaming the appraiser.
You said you offered 20,000. Did you offer 20,000 above list price, or did you offer to bridge a gap of $20,000?
20,000 over list price, and then I put 20,000 on that addendum because they couldn't go more than 20,000. I mean, we had 10,000 in DD, 5,000 in earnest money. We went 20,000 over, no closing costs, and we signed that addendum for 20,000 over because they were VA, and they're like, I can't bring more than 20,000. If this appraisal's off by 30, I need to know that they can make up the difference. And so we sent that, and there were no other offers on the table when we sent that.
Right.
And I said to him when he called me back, I said, so what's the problem? He's like, I just can't get my sellers there. They had a bad experience with the family member that had a bad appraisal, and they're just not comfortable signing this.
Well, it's like any other offer. Everybody on the team right now is writing really good offers, and they're not all winning. So
Right.
sometimes it doesn't matter how good the document is. It doesn't matter how well you explain it. Some people aren't going to do it for a variety of reasons. So that's why it's a good thing that we got a couple of different options here. One thing I'm seeing more and more of in the triangle over the last week is listing agents are providing their own appraisal addendum in the MLS documents. And if you make an offer above list price, they don't want your addendum. You're going to sign the appraisal addendum that the listing agent provides. So I don't know if you guys are seeing that, but I've been seeing that in a lot of MLS docs over the last.
What does that one say?
The same
Well,
thing.
they're very, I mean, they're basically the same thing. It's just that they have their preferred attorney who has drafted theirs that they have felt comfortable explaining to their sellers. And they've probably discussed this with their seller as their strategy about when they get in a multiple offer situation. I've got a listing coming to market next week, and I've told my seller the same thing. We're not going to entertain any offers above list price that don't sign an appraisal addendum. I mean, why would you at this point, you know?
Right. 100%. You really never should, unless it's been on the market for a long time and you've gotten feedback that it's clearly overpriced. And then this is where the protection is. That's the point of the document, I think. Now, like we said, some people might want to use it out of the gate. If you're not in multiple offers, of course, but if it's day 2 on the market and they've got multiple offers, the gap addendum is just saying, hey, we're putting our toes into this because you're not comfortable doing what it's going to take, and you're probably going to learn the hard way. I also have seen other agents put the same thing out there. There's no reason you can't do it with your listings. This is what people get caught up on. Who's that attorney? I've never heard of that attorney. Who's that? I don't know. I've never used that attorney. Who gives a shit? It's an attorney. What's the document say? Anyways, that's the gap addendum. Did we talk about that one enough? Not there yet. Here's the appraised value addendum. Now we have 2 of these, and basically there's one if you're working with sellers and there's one if you're working with buyers. The one here that you're working with buyers says that the buyer is only going to pay the appraised value. It's very clear about that. The one where you're working with sellers says that the buyer is going to pay whatever the contract price is. Any questions about those? There's nothing to input in either of those documents. It's only signatures. The one that protects buyers says the buyers will only pay the appraised value. The one that protects sellers says the buyers will pay the contract price regardless of the appraised value. Any questions about that?
No buyer's going to sign that.
That's not true.
They sign them all the
They
time.
absolutely will.
Yeah.
It happens every day.
Yeah.
All right. Any questions about the appraisal addendums? All right. Here's the 4th document that I wanted to talk about is the escalation clause. Now, for everyone's benefit, and if you don't get kickback on the appraisal addendums, you'll definitely get it on this one, because escalation clauses are frowned upon in North Carolina, even though they're not illegal. All right. Basically, the heart of an escalation clause is saying that I agree to pay X amount above any other highest offer up to a certain point or not to a certain point. And that's where these 2 amounts come in. X over offers shall not exceed cap. So say the home is listed for $400,000 and your people are willing to pay $500 over the next highest offer up to $450,000. Or unlimited, they don't care. Whatever it takes, I'll pay $800,000 for the house. I don't care. Don't put an amount there. That's what the second box is for. It can be empty. You could write unlimited, whatever. The heart of the document is, though, that ideally they're giving you evidence that they have an offer that would kick the escalation clause into effect. Where the pushback comes from other agents is sharing that document, saying that they have an offer at an amount that would kick that into place. So, whereas the old document said they have to provide that, this document doesn't say they have to provide anything. You're basically taking them at their word. So, again, This isn't about getting a buyer a deal. It's about getting the house. Any questions about this document?
I'm just curious on what people think about how would you discuss with your sellers about setting an escalation clause?
Well, you have to prove that there's other offers are on the table. I mean, that's the biggest thing. The problem, the one thing that you can run into here is, and you have to explain that because I've used this on my beach house, and you have to explain to them, okay, well, if your cap is 500,000 and they have an offer on the table for 510, this escalation clause is null and void.
Right. I don't like escalation clauses.
In fact, my Virginia buyer asked me, because she has her house under contract in Virginia, and they got a shit ton of escalation clauses, and she got like 85,000 over ask, and you had the form had, you had to put all of the information of the buyer, their offer, all of that stuff. And so she asked me, can I use an escalation clause? I said, well, we don't really use those here. I can do whatever you want, but it's just really not usually necessary.
I feel like they're not well understood.
Yeah, I feel like,
here,
yeah, true.
because they're not used very often. I think it just causes confusion, honestly.
No, I think you're 1,000% right. And other agents see any of these documents and their eyes cross and they roll their eyes and then they shut down and they're like, oh my God, I'm not used to this. There's something wrong about this. Now I'm not doing my client right, when it's completely just lack of understanding. You don't have to use any of these documents. They're there as an option to present to your client that puts in writing what you are willing to do. That's it. The appraisal addendums are very clear about that now. The escalation clause is a little fuzzy only because we can't make them prove what other offers they have. But my whole thing is, if you're willing to pay X, just say you're willing to pay X and don't put an asterisk beside it if you really want the house. But as we know, not everybody is that way. And our job isn't to say, I would use this document or I wouldn't use this document if I were buying or selling a house. Our job is to present the options to our clients, help them understand them, and then let them decide whether or not they want to use it. It's not about how we feel about them personally. It's about giving our clients options.
Yeah, I think I would use this more if I had a buyer that was really like, we kind of got to understand that there weren't, like a dozen offers. There was like one or two, and they didn't want to overpay, but they wanted to win the house. Then maybe this could be something, an option you explain to them. But then if you're going in with like fighting dozens of offers, this is going to get lost. You might as well just go with that top number, the cap.
I don't like the escalation clause because I feel like it goes against how I explain making a strong offer in my buyer consult. As an example, if the house is listed for $365 and you're willing to pay $385, then you make the offer for $385. You don't make an offer for $380 and expect to get a counter. You may not get a counter. If you're willing to pay $385, but you offer $383 and someone wins it for $386 and you were willing to pay $386 or more, well, it's your fault. You should have made that strong offer to begin with, right? You don't know if you're going to get a counter. You don't know if you're going to get a highest and best. When they say they're taking offers until Sunday, they don't have to abide by that. So you need to make your strongest offer from the beginning. And I feel like when you say that and then you're like, oh, we also have this escalation clause, it's kind of like, well, are you trying to get me to overpay at the beginning? I don't know. And maybe I'm not explaining that well, but I also, as a listing agent, I kind of think it's a cheap way of trying to win without not paying what you're really willing to pay. Make the best offer at the beginning and let's get this thing going. I'm not saying anyone has to agree with me. I'm just giving you my point.
I think it depends on if you put a cap or leave it open-ended. I mean, there's a room for all of these. To have their play.
Wouldn't the listing agent have to provide the other offers saying that since they agreed to take this, when they have to, like, what if your buyers wanted proof that,
You can, that's the whole issue. You can't make them show you other offers.
yeah.
So, I mean, that's a way to say, hey, we have this document, but we're going to have to take their word for it. So you should just make your best offer,
Yeah.
right? As long as you feel like you're giving your people options and you're winning, I don't care what document you use if they're happy with it. The point of this is just to make sure that we understand how they work. If you never use them, that's fine. But if you do use them, make sure you understand how they work, so you can explain it to your folks.
That gap addendum because I had with those couple that I was trying to get them into a house so many times, and they came up with a pretty hefty, to me, I thought, a hefty due diligence area. So we used the gap addendum because I mean, I would have just kicked myself if they would have lost it. So I just felt like it was a good protective way to protect them.
Well, and that's fair. You know, what I will caution everyone is just because it feels like too much to pay, due diligence, earnest money, purchase price for you doesn't mean it is for them. So don't project your thoughts on amounts on your clients because it's their money, not yours.
I just ran into that. My client, this was clearly a house that needed a lot of work. It was listed under 200,000. I told her, I said, you're in multiple offers. There's 5 on the table right now. This price point is very attractive to cash buyers that are going to turn this around and rent it out. She's like, well, what do I need to do to win the house? I said, I can't tell you that. I said, I don't represent the seller. I don't know their bottom line. I don't know what the other offers are. I said, you need to go in with your strongest offer. What, 240? I'm like, your decision, your comfort level. So she went 20 over and, said she could pay 20 over, and we lost to a cash deal because they went more than that. So it's just
Right.
about.
So here's the thing, though. You didn't lose to a cash deal. You lost to somebody who paid more for the house. The financing doesn't matter. They paid more for the house. Now, if you had lost to somebody who paid less and paid cash, then you lost to a cash deal. But you didn't lose to a cash deal. You lost to somebody who paid more for the house. I want y'all to all be very cognizant of that because it's easy to, for lack of a better term, blame why you didn't win the offer, why your offer wasn't the best offer, when in fact your offer wasn't the highest offer. That's why it didn't win. I want you all to be very careful with that language when you're talking to your clients, because if you start saying we lost to cash and they can't pay cash, well then they'll feel like they'll never win. You see where I'm coming from?
Cash is not the sexiest offer all the time anymore. Those days are over. Think about it from a seller's perspective. If you've got a cash offer that's $10,000 above list price, right? They don't have to worry about appraisal and they can probably close in 10 to 14 days, right? That's a strong offer. If you've got a $15,000 offer that's a conventional loan and they can't close in 10 days, but they can close in 30, and they provide proof of funds and say, hey, look, we know the home's not going to appraise, but we got 80 grand in the bank and we're willing to bridge that gap if we have to. Here's an appraisal addendum. You absolutely 100 times out of 100 are going to wait an additional 2 weeks to get 5 or 10 grand more. So we got to make sure that we're not setting the expectation with our clients that if you don't have cash, your hopes are lost, because that is not the case.
I think that's fair. And Janine, don't mistake me. I'm not saying that's what you did. I was using your language as an example for everybody of how to be careful about how you talk to your clients.
I actually did lose to a cash deal because they could close in 10 days, but then it fell through because the buyer didn't feel like they were going to allow her to close fast enough. So it ended up, they should have actually taken our offer, I think.
Well, and so, what is that a good example of? None of these are hard and fast rules that apply every time. That's why these are called best practices. not absolute practices, right? Because every situation is independent of all the other ones and made within its own vacuum, right? Every case is unique. Some buyers will take less because they can close faster. In some cases, cash will be king because of the date, not necessarily the money, right? In some cases, the money trumps, and it doesn't matter where it's coming from or how long it takes, because we want the most for the house. We don't need to close in 15 days. We can close in 60, right? Maybe we need that, the seller needs that long to get out. One thing that I would say that, you know, we talk about often, and this might be just a good way to wrap it up, is before you use any of these, you know, also talk with the listing agent about it instead of just dropping it in front of them when you send the offer over. Because that's a good way to get a, what the fuck is this? I've never seen this before. Who is Jackson Law? They're in Raleigh. We're in Hampstead. What the hell are you doing?
Yeah, I called the agent the other day and I said, do you have appraisal addendums in hand? She said, yeah. I said, what are you seeing? What do you prefer? She's like, well, I got one from Starling Law that explains what happens to the earnest money. I said, okay, well, what do you do if there's no earnest money in the offer? She's like, and then I've got a few others that are the conditions addendum from JBOR. That's mostly what I see. She says, but you know, she told me as a buyer, as a listing agent, she's like, yeah, I've been on the flip side and I always wonder, what can I send over to guarantee that the sellers will reduce? And she's like, I just haven't seen a document like that yet. So they're seeing all different kinds of things. So I just had the conversation and I said, look, they're good for this. Let me know if you want an appraisal addendum. And I think that that was fair, so that, like what you, to your point, you're like, oh Lord, this is a scary piece of paper.
Right. And I mean, the easy fix would be for NCAR to come out with one for everybody to use.
Yeah. It's so crappy that these are just so expected now with offers. Like, it's just ridiculous that we even have to, that the expectation is that we just send them over. I hate that.
I would say if you're representing a seller and you're anticipating multiple offers, if the clients don't, if the, you know, just set the expectation that, hey, if you're going to use an appraisal addendum, use ours, you know, or not, I don't care. But if that's your comfort level, just put it out there. There's nothing wrong with that, because that's what people are doing. They're saying, hey, if you're going to use an appraisal addendum, ours is in MLS Docs, use that one. That's the one we're expecting. So while I will roll my eyes at agents that question them, at the same time, we would probably do the same thing with something we're not necessarily familiar with. So I'm not going to tell them that they're completely terrible at their jobs. I'm just going to say, hey, it's pretty clear what it says. Don't just poo-poo it until you take the time to understand it. And I would tell us not to do the same thing, or to do the same thing. You know, make sure you understand it, or provide an option. Provide, you know, if you don't like ours, give me yours, and vice versa. Was this helpful? Do you guys feel like you have a better understanding of the intent and how to use these docs, and to at least explain them to your clients? Because I know we've had some questions about them, and at the end of the day, I want everybody to feel good about explaining them to your clients. That's the most important thing. Whether they choose to use them is not necessarily the most important thing. It's whether or not you give them options and they understand what their options are. I will take your silence as yes. All right, bye. Y'all have a great day. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.